Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt, cried the waitress. Then the undercover CEO did something no one expected. What if a single cruel act could trigger the most beautiful transformation in someone's life? Julia pressed her back against the cold brick wall behind Tony's diner, her uniform still soaked from the coffee a customer had deliberately poured on her just minutes ago. At 34, she was used to invisible bruises, the kind that came from working 3 jobs to keep her 8-year-old son fed and warm. Her trembling hands wiped away tears, not because of the burns, but because of the man's final words, "Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, you wouldn't be stuck serving people like me." What Julia didn't realize was that someone had witnessed everything. A man sitting quietly in the corner booth. David Chen, wearing faded jeans and a simple button-down, looked like any ordinary customer. But in truth, he was worth more than most small nations. What he saw that night stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years. Julia had been at Tony's diner for 8 months, ever since the car parts factory where she worked for 6 years had shut down. The pay barely covered the rent on her small apartment, but it was honest work. She'd learned to find dignity in any job that kept food on the table. Most customers were kind, truckers who tipped well, elderly couples who smiled when she refilled their cups. But lately others came in just to remind her of her place. David had started visiting 3 weeks earlier. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee and whatever pie was fresh that day. He spoke softly, drove an old pickup truck, and dressed plainly. Julia thought he was just another working man, maybe a contractor, maybe a mechanic, someone who understood hard work. She noticed his calloused hands, his quiet please and thank you, and how he always left a $20 for a $12 meal. What she didn't know was that David was the CEO of Chin Industries, spending months traveling across the country, visiting small diners like this, not as a boss, but as a man learning what made a business truly human. His company rebuilt failing places into thriving community spaces, but he knew that no spreadsheet could measure kindness or dignity. You had to feel it, to see how people acted when they thought no one important was watching. The man who'd humiliated Julia was Frank, a regular who took joy in making others miserable. David had noticed him for weeks, the spilled drinks, the nasty remarks, the way he left exact change after forcing Julia to clean up his deliberate messes. Each time David's jaw tightened a little more. But tonight Frank had crossed a line. When Julia walked back inside, still trembling, Frank waved his empty cup. "Hurry up," he barked, "and try not to spill it this time." The few diners nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Then David quietly rose from his booth. His footsteps were calm, deliberate. Julia approached Frank's table, trying to steady the pot in her hands. Frank glared up at David. "What do you want?" "I'm trying to get service here." "I've been watching you," David said evenly, his voice carrying just enough strength to silence the room. "For weeks I've seen how you treat this woman, with complete disrespect." His tone wasn't angry, but it cut deeper than any shout. Frank sneered. "Mind your own business, pal. If she can't handle the job, maybe she should find another one." He turned toward Julia. "Well, are you going to pour or not?" Her hands trembled. She needed this job. Her son's school had just sent another overdue notice for lunch money. The electric bill was past due. Losing even a single shift could mean no dinner tomorrow, but before she could pour, David placed his hand gently over the cup. "No," he said softly. "Julia, you don't need to serve someone who treats you like you're less than human." He turned to Frank. "And you need to understand something. Every person in this diner has a story, people who love them, dreams they're fighting for. The difference is most of us don't use our pain as an excuse to hurt others." Frank's chair screeched as he stood up. "Who do you think you are talking to me like that? You're just some blue-collar nobody." David stayed calm, though his eyes hardened. "Maybe, but I know the difference between a man and a bully." He reached into his wallet, took out a $100 bill, and placed it on the table. "Your meals are covered for the next month? But here's the deal. You're going to treat everyone here with respect, or you'll find somewhere else to eat." The diner went completely silent. Julia's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they came from something else. No one had ever stood up for her before. Frank, red-faced and embarrassed, tossed some money on the table and stormed out. But David wasn't done. As the room slowly returned to its rhythm, Julia set down the coffee pot and turned toward him, still shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I could have handled it." "I know you could have," David said, his expression softening. "You've been handling it for weeks. But just because you can endure something doesn't mean you should have to." He gestured toward his booth. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" Julia glanced toward the kitchen. Tony, pretending not to watch, gave her a small nod. The dinner rush had ended, and the few remaining customers lingered over their coffee, lost in quiet conversation. Julia followed David to his booth and slid into the seat across from him. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand. "And I owe you an apology." "An apology? For what?" "For sitting here for 3 weeks, watching that man disrespect you, and not saying a word until tonight." His voice carried genuine regret. "I've been coming here to understand this place better. I'm in the restaurant business, and I was considering buying Tony's diner." Julia's heart dropped. Another corporate buyer, another job she'd soon lose. "Oh," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. David noticed the fear flicker in her eyes and quickly continued. "But what I've learned here isn't in any business plan. I've seen you cover extra shifts, help sick co-workers, and treat every customer with kindness, even when they don't deserve it. You remember how people take their coffee. You look after the older customers. And you do all this while fighting your own battles. How do you know about my struggles?" Julia asked cautiously. "Because I recognize them," David replied softly. "My mother worked 3 jobs too. I've seen that same exhaustion, that same look when every dollar has to stretch further than it should." He paused, his tone lowering. "Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments." Then he continued. "Julia, you've already proven everything you need to prove. Watching you work has taught me more about leadership and dignity than any business school ever could." Julia stared at him, trying to process his words. "I don't understand. What do you mean you're in the restaurant business?" David reached into his wallet and pulled out a card. She read it twice before realizing what it meant. David Chen, CEO, Chen Industries. Her eyes widened. I'm someone who believes that the best businesses are built by treating people right," David said simply. "And you've shown me exactly what that looks like." He leaned forward slightly. "Julia, I want to buy this diner, but I want to do it the right way. I want to turn it into something that serves this community with pride. And I want you to help me do it." "I don't know anything about running a business," Julia protested. "But you do," David said firmly. "You know what truly matters. You know how to make people feel welcome, how to care, how to keep going even when life feels impossible. That's what leadership looks like." His expression softened. "I'm offering you a partnership, Julia. Not a job, a real stake in what we build here together." Julia felt her world shift. "I can't. I have a son, and I've never—" "Your son is exactly why this will work," David said gently. "Every choice we make will focus on families like yours. Better wages, health care, profit sharing, education funds for employees' kids. I've been searching for someone who understands what it means to build something real. Watching you these past weeks showed me that person." Tears filled Julia's eyes, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. "Why me?" "You could have anyone," she whispered. "Because anyone can manage numbers," David replied. "But not everyone has a heart that sees people the way you do. Not everyone understands that the soul of a business is how it makes people feel." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "Julia, what would you say if I told you that in 6 months, you could be the general manager of the finest community restaurant in 3 states? 6 months later, Julia stood in the beautifully renovated dining room of Julia's table, watching her 8-year-old son, Michael, carefully arrange fresh flowers on each table. The transformation was beyond anything she'd imagined. The cracked booths were replaced with comfortable seating. Harsh lights swapped for warm amber tones. And the walls now displayed local art, including a painting Michael had made of the new garden But the biggest changes weren't cosmetic. Every employee now earned a fair wage and had access to health care. The team included 2 single mothers rebuilding their lives, a retired teacher working part-time, and 3 teens saving for college through the restaurant's scholarship fund. Julia discovered she had a gift for leading, training, organizing, inspiring others, something David had seen in her long before she believed it herself. Tony had stayed on. As head cook and part owner, his traditional dishes now paired with seasonal specials Julia designed based on customers' stories about their families. The diner had become exactly what David envisioned, not just a restaurant, but a gathering place. The community board overflowed with thank you notes, local job postings, and offers of help from neighbors. Julia even launched a pay-it-forward program where customers could buy meals for those in need. The wall of kindness, as Michael called it, never stayed empty. David still visited often. He sat at the counter, sipping coffee while discussing expansion plans with Julia. 3 nearby towns had already reached out about opening their own Julia's table, each one to be led by someone with the same heart and resilience Julia embodied. As Julia watched, Michael helped an elderly couple to their favorite window seat. Her mind drifted back to that cold night months ago, the night she'd stood outside, invisible and defeated. She thought about how one act of kindness had changed everything. Frank had never returned, but sometimes she wondered if he'd learned something that night, too. She hoped he had. She'd realized that bitterness was too heavy to carry when there was so much joy in building something meaningful. David appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "Just thinking how everything can change in a single moment," Julia said softly, taking the cup. "How one person choosing kindness can create ripples that reach farther than they'll ever see." David smiled. "That's exactly what you do every day, Julia. You make those ripples."